move forward. So then, as Reggie and I and Amy and Kelly were talking, we said, well, all right, but one of the most important pieces that you contribute to from an institutional point of view is really in helping students retain at the university. And I'm going to explain why your role is so critical in a minute. But there's a new lens that's kind of emerging on student success, and it's called student thriving. And I thought you might be interested in understanding a little bit about student thriving, because what we have found is we have found ways that we can measure student thriving through a measure called the thriving quotient. And what we know about students that are thriving is that they have much higher rates of matriculating from their first to their second year. They feel like tuition is a worthwhile investment. And I know that seems like a quirky one to say, but actually this is a proxy for graduation. Isn't that strange? That when they feel like their first or second year that tuition is a worthwhile investment, their chances of graduating from college are greatly increased. So it's a proxy for that. And they're more likely to recommend their colleges, and they're more likely just to enjoy being a student. So it's a really important indicator that we understand. And so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what goes into that, because it's not the normal things that we measure. Oftentimes we'll measure parental education level, the type of high school they went to, their high school GPA, those types of things. But all of those things are things they can't change. And so we said, we're going to measure only things that are malleable, only things that students actually can work on and change. And so I'm going to go pretty fast through these 5 because I really want to get to the things that we can do about it. But these are the 5 elements. So engage learning. I always say I knew the students in my class that were going to graduate from college when I taught a first-year experience class, and people were like, "How did you know?" And I said the number of questions they asked and how engaged they were. Because they were curious, and that curiosity has a very important plays a very important factor in students' motivation to learn and to stay with it. But they're also the ones that are trying to find ways to make sense of their class, like why is this important? And I always tell my colleagues that are teaching the liberal arts, I said, if you don't make that liberal arts relevant to the students, you're not helping us with retention. You've got to help them to understand how to meaningfully process this into a way that makes sense for their life. So that's engaged learning. The next one is academic determination. And this is a lot of the things you might think about, but it's, do they have goals? And are they working, and are they able to regulate their behavior to attain those goals? So are they able to regulate that they're not going to go out on a drinking binge on a Tuesday when they have a class on Wednesday? That's a bad example, but you know what I mean. They're able to regulate who they are to reach their goals. And then this is an important one, I think, environmental mastery. And the question on the inventory is, or is this belief, is that my success is up to me and I hang in there and keep going. This is especially important when it's a high predictor for our Hispanic students. I'll talk about it a little bit in a minute. But the people who feel like they have an internal locus of control, like if I study hard enough, I can pass this test, much higher rate of graduating from a university than those who don't think, even if I study hard, I'm not going to do well. I don't like this study. My nephew was in college a few years ago, and he's like, I just can't do well in biology. And I said, you're absolutely right, because you have that belief, and that belief sets you on a track. So you folks see this all the time, even when you're working with your students. Are they able to set goals when they're working in your ministries, and are they able to move forward? And then diverse citizenship is one of the key pieces of student thriving. And I think that the students that are able to really appreciate the differences, and I'm going to talk a little bit about interfaith work at the end, but I think we've always seen the kind of the religious differences as kind of on the fringe and those kind of things, but I actually think it's more important to their thriving than we've ever thought, is their ability to appreciate difference across the religious lines. And then And then this other piece is socially responsible. They feel like they can make a difference in their communities and in their areas. And so I also think that some of the programs that you run that are service oriented are really helping to embed this in students' psychic, that, you know what, I can go out and make a difference in my community. I can work in areas that I can use my major in ways. I can do things that will make life better. This generation is particularly wired to these types of thriving indicators. But here is one of the ones that is absolutely essential, and it's social connectedness. One of the most important indicators on this whole tool is when they strongly agree with, I have friends who listen to me. And I said, I don't know what COVID has done completely to our social connection. I think only time will tell. But as we're coming back together again, I think teaching students and moving them in the direction of social connectedness, even if it's virtual, even if it's just, I'm going to see your face, that is still social connection. Now, I don't tend to believe it's as good as being face to face, but maybe that's because I'm old. I'm not sure. But I think that the social connectedness is really important. And then a positive perspective, they have an optimistic outlook on life. They feel like life is good, that even when things are uncertain, they usually expect the best. So these are the 5 pieces that make up thriving. And you probably see it in your students all the time. Those that seem to be thriving and going well seem to hold some of these types of attitudes. But I also wonder if it's not something that's deeply held within our faith traditions, that as we're teaching these our faith traditions, that we maybe should be thinking more about what will my teaching on this have to do with their ability to thrive right now in the classroom as we move forward. But I wanted to hit on this one next, and then open it up to give you a chance to ask some questions. But there are some very specific pathways to thriving for students of color. Now, these 5 pieces are found. These are high predictors of just about every student group, right? The key is always psychological sense of community, which I'll talk about in a moment. And so if you're familiar with psychometrics at all, when you look at the path analysis, it doesn't matter whether you are traditional aged, a person of ethnic or racial difference, a adult students, a young student, doesn't matter what you are. The pathway to thriving, which means one of the ways that thriving is accelerated, is through a sense of community. And I worry for this group, because they don't go to things like churches as much. They don't join those types of things as much. And so I think that campus community becomes even more essential for this generation of college students. But anyway, a major, whether they're certain on their major, has a pretty predictive impact on thriving. Student-faculty interaction for certain groups. Spirituality, which I want to hit on, is a pretty significant predictor for some racial and ethnic groups, and campus involvement place. So as you look at those 3, you think, the bottom, the psychological community, spirituality, and campus involvement, those are in your bailiwick, aren't they? Those are a lot of what you're doing. So I want to encourage you to say that, remember, a lot of what you're doing is really helping these students not just understand spiritual direction, but actually thrive in college. Psychological sense of community is really, do they feel like they belong, and do they feel like they have a voice? So the first level is, do they feel like they're a member? So as they join your groups, does somebody know their name? But if they just stay at that level, that will not keep them engaged. So the real connection is not only am I a member here, at this ministry, but am I in leadership? Am I taking on other roles? Do I have a voice? Are people listening to what I have to say? Are they asking my opinion? Are they shaping? Are they letting me shape programs? Are they letting me run the programs? Those are the things that build a deeper sense of belongingness. So as you're thinking about your programs, I think what's really important is to think about, the sooner that you can give it away to students to run, the deeper they create a sense of community. And when we look at this through the students of color pathways, this sense of community is the most important pathway for students of color. For white men, faculty-student interaction plays a big piece of this, but for students of color, coming through a sense of I belong here is critical, and I think this is why we lose a lot of color. And spirituality is not necessarily religiosity. It's not the same as religiosity, but both spirituality and religiosity play a part. But it's really about this sense of meaning and purpose. It's about, can they answer the why? And you find that I have oftentimes found in working with my students of color through the years is that they have to really understand why they are here more. For our white students, oftentimes, and I don't mean to stereotype, but I just have found over the years, but for my white students of color, my white students, they oftentimes will say things like their purpose is because their parents wanted them to come, and that was enough purpose for them. Now, I think by the time they get to be juniors and seniors, that changes, but that was enough. Whereas for our students of color, they seem to be looking for a sense of purpose earlier. And I found this to be really interesting in a study that we did. It was a number of years ago, but it seems to be holding true that spirituality and religiousness mediate the impact of microaggressions because they support the mechanisms of forgiveness and compassion. And we could talk all day about this and what's loaded into this statement and those kind of things, but I do think that spirituality does provide a protective layer for our students of color. And so let me divide this up into our students of color quickly and say so that you'll understand this more of a student, and then I'll open it up for open it up for questions, and then I'll end real quickly with what we can do from this. But you find with Latinx, that's a sense of community is really, really high, and spirituality, that they really want to know that that this college degree means something, and they actually, isn't this interesting? They report higher levels of thriving after they have faced adversity and come through it successfully. So their resilience plays a big part in their thriving. The unique thing is that financial issues play a much larger role. They feel it and they worry about it more than any other racial or ethnic group. Our Black students, that sense of community, their first year is critical. Campus involvement is critical, and actually satisfaction with their faculty. So that's why I'm always emphasizing faculty training, but I think it's not only satisfaction with their faculty, but I think it's satisfaction with a caring adult is critical. What's unique, listen to this, you guys, on Black students, spirituality contributed doubly to their thriving. So spirituality impacts almost all the racial groups, but for Black students, it is the supercharger. Spirituality is a really, really important piece of this. And for Asian students, we find that the sense of community and satisfaction with faculty and their grade level. So the longer they were at a university, the more they thrived. It just was across the board with them. But faculty played a really important role for our Asian students in terms of knowing their name, seeing them, and also their own individual grades in a class made a really important did that. Here's a thing that I thought was interesting. We did a big thriving study during the pandemic. This was the only group that Asian students actually had higher thriving scores during the remote learning time. I don't know what that means, but we found over and over again that remote learning actually was beneficial for Asian students. So we could talk a lot. I don't know exactly why. I don't have the why yet, but just so that you know, it's an interesting element to be. Okay, so I know I'm down to, 20 minutes, Reggie? So do we want to take a couple of questions and I'll finish up quickly and end with the rest of them? Or do you want me just to go straight to the ending and end with questions at the end?
I think we should go straight to the ending
Okay.
and end with questions. Yeah, because
Okay.
I want to make sure that I give you
Great.
time and then we'll have some spillover. Okay?
Great. Good.
All
And
right,
I can
thanks.
stay a little longer if it needs to be. But then this is really kind of like based on all these things that I've said, what would be my advice from a student affairs point of view to you? And I would say anytime anytime you're talking to people in student affairs, especially the higher ups, and you can link your programs to retention efforts, you will get their attention in different ways. And I'm just saying, because the pressure is going to be on student affairs people to get retention up, because if enrollment is going down, the only way you can really balance your budget is retention. And I don't mean to make this all about just the numbers, but I'm just telling you from the vice president's level, this is the pressure they're getting. So even to be able to use this thriving model, or even to be able to say we impact sense of community and we have an impact on spirituality, and we know from some of the research that impacts retention, that will really speak volumes to them, because what you'll be saying to them is, you care about my problems, you care. And I don't think it is at all asking you to stretch outside what you already do. It's maybe just changing language in a little way to connect with them. And I think really finding connections to on-campus mental health professionals is going to be really important. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to make more and more connections. You're going to have to send more and more of your students to those folks. But I also think that there could be a little bit more reciprocal, because I do think that sometimes when our mental health people get into questions of meaning, purpose, and spirituality, they don't have the lengthy time that it takes to really walk with the student through that, but a spiritual director does. I mean, that's what you do. And so just to make the connections and let them know kind of what resources are available and those kind of things, I think might be a really great thing. I think there has always been an interfaith movement in higher education. Different universities, different places, have done this, but I think what you're beginning to see is more of a growing movement in public institutions, not all the places, but in certain public institutions, you're finding a lot more openness to, wait a minute, we've always said separation of church and state, is the hard line. But then all of a sudden now we're waking up to the fact that, well, that may be the hard line, but here's the reality. Our students are spiritual beings, and they have questions of meaning of faith, and they have questions that can really be addressed by faith leaders. So I think that being a part of that movement on campuses and across the country, I think would be really, really important as we go forward. I think the Interfaith Youth Course, that you may already be involved in that, but that's a growing group. It's beginning to co-sponsor things, like with our Association of Colleges and Universities. They co-sponsored an Institute on Teaching and Learning for campus-wide interfaith excellence, and they're beginning to do a lot of different kinds of working across lines and working within universities, so keeping up. But I just think, and you guys probably know a lot more about this than I even do, but I've been very interested. So I have a good friend of mine is the vice president for student affairs at Virginia Tech, and they just started a whole new outreach in the interfaith space. And he was talking about how many of his colleagues at different public institutions have been calling him, asking him how did he get that launched and how did he move that forward. So if you've had a background of working at Publix and you haven't found much reception to what you're doing, you might find that it's a new day coming on campuses, and you might try that again. And then, of course, the reductions in higher ed budgets may produce really new ways to partner. Now we know that you probably have a workload that's beyond, what you can possibly manage now. But as you prioritize your work, as you're beginning to think in terms of it, what you're going to move forward, what you're going to keep doing, what you're going to stop doing, I would say that there's a lot of synergism and a lot of leveraging of your resources that could benefit from finding those partners in higher education. And again, just like I said on the prior slide, I think it's a new day coming. And I think that you don't let your history with these institutions completely determine what the future is going to be. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to look, feel, and act very differently in higher education. And I think you folks may be part of the beneficiary of a new openness. Reggie, give it to you.
All right. Whoa.
That's a lot.
Eileen, it was fantastic. We do,
guys.
yeah, we do have some wonderful questions, and I'm gonna see if we can get some of those answered on here, and then after that, I'll turn it over to Amy for some final thoughts and all that. But let's get some questions answered. What programs have been most effective for recruitment and